what precisely, since we're going to pursue this, what precisely is toxic masculinity?
Okay, I think that the moment when you kind of, I have a hard time to kind of describe it in English. Let's say, that you kind of go over a boundary that kind of neglects the freedom of the opposite, well, gender or whatsoever. So that's toxic masculinity, and that you kind of have.
But that would also be toxic femininity.
Well, may I like finish my sentence?
Sure.
Please? Thank you. And then also, I lost my sentence now. But no, I owe you back. I'm back. But more in the sense that can someone help me here in the audience?
What's gonna happen if I blame you, hey, you are a murderer, and then you ask me, hey, I don't know, but how do you think I'm a murderer? What is a murderer? And then you are like, I don't know, I can't recall it. I think, yeah, no, I don't think that's the right way to blame someone. If you're trying to blame, then know the definition of what you're saying, what you're blaming, okay? And let's start this video from now.
Hi, Jordan. My question is, what is the antidote towards toxic masculinity?
Well, the antidote is responsible masculinity. And what does responsible mean? It means, well, if you're responsible, then you're trying to do what's honest first. So you're careful with your speech and your actions. You're careful with your speech in that you don't say things that you know to be false. And you're careful in your actions so that you don't have to lie about what you do. That's a good start. And then the next thing would be that you're capable of taking responsibility for yourself at least, so that once you're an adult, no one else has to bend over backwards to ensure that you don't unduly suffer in the world. And so that's responsibility for yourself. And then if you get halfway good at that, well then, you might think about taking on the responsibility of a family and contributing to your community and doing all those things in a harmonious manner. And that's obviously the antidote to toxic masculinity, which is not a phrase I would generally use. I just think about it as, what would you call it? I think sinful behavior is a much more accurate representation personally, but it's honesty and responsibility. And I do think about it as a function of harmony. I got that a lot from reading Jean Piaget, whose work was a psychological extension of Kant's categorical imperative, because Kant believed that you should act in a manner such that if the way you acted became a universal, that would be beneficial. But Piaget formalized that very nicely, showing that one of the bases for the emergence of a system of genuine ethics was an iterable form of reciprocity, so that, so for example, I can give you a quick example of that. My granddaughter, who's now 15 months old, has discovered a new game, and it's a Piagetian game, a developmental game, and she discovered this by watching, but also on her own, and partly because it's a very deep part of human nature. So she has this little wooden spoon. And her game is, you sit with her at the table, and her game is, she gives you the spoon. And then you take it. And then you give it back. And then she's all happy about that. And then she gives the spoon to the person who's sitting beside her. And then they give it back to her, and she's very happy about that. And so it's an amazing game, because she's learned to give up something, to let go of something that she wants, and to trust someone else to return it to her, and that's what she's playing with. And then you can play with that game. It's quite fun. So, and you have to pay careful attention to her and watch how she's manifesting her emotions. And so maybe what you do is you take the spoon and you hide it under your hand. That sort of disconcerts her a bit. Then you show it to her and pick it up and give it to her, and she's happy about that, because what she sees is that the principle of reciprocity can maintain itself across a set of transformations, and that's really exciting to her. Or you can give her the spoon, and she can give it back to you, and then she can reach for it, and you can pull it away 1/4 of an inch. And that sort of disconcerts her, and then she'll... You want to repeat that?
I'm sorry. I said that didn't cover really a toxic masculinity, right? Because
yes, it's dealing with the principle of reciprocity.
You just said that you have to be honest and responsible as a man.
Now, I don't know why, but this woman was not really happy with what Jordan Peterson answered to her questions. When you ask someone, hey, I think you are this, then you need to know what you mean by this, okay? You don't blame someone without knowing what the word you're blaming him on means. Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like, it doesn't make sense, you know? And now, Dr. Jordan Peterson here said that, okay, so what is toxic masculinity? He says that masculinity in itself is nothing wrong, or it's not toxic. So what does Dr. Jordan Peterson says here? He says that masculinity in itself is nothing wrong, is not something to be ashamed of. Masculinity is a good feature of a man, and a man should have, and every man does have, but they don't really use it properly. That some man, whoever is using it in the wrong way, is said to, you could say that there's a wrong man, but that doesn't mean that masculinity of that man becomes wrong, because masculinity in itself is not bad, okay? You could use it in a bad way, you could use it in the right way, you could use it in the wrong way, you could use it to become terrorist. I don't give a fuck, okay? But whatever you use it as, masculinity still says itself as nothing bad, nothing wrong. I would say it's good, to be honest. But what this woman was trying to press on Dr. Jordan Peterson here was that masculinity is bad. And what happened here was that Dr. Jordan Peterson asked her.
Well, put it this way. When I'm giving the spoon back to my granddaughter, I'm not engaging in toxic masculinity. And that was the point that I was trying to make, is that, and this deep reciprocity and trust is part of the social contract, and it is precisely the antidote to what precisely, since we're going to pursue this, what precisely is toxic masculinity, as opposed to, say, toxic femininity or toxic humanity? What exactly are you asking me about?
I really want to know what you like, how you would describe toxic masculinity. Because
No, I want you to define what toxic masculinity constitutes. Since we're going to define things so carefully, let's do it.
Okay, so let's define it shortly.
All right, shortly, please.
Okay, I think that the moment when you kind of, I have a hard time to kind of describe it in English. Let's say, that you kind of go over a boundary that kind of neglects the freedom of the opposite, well, gender or whatsoever. So that's toxic masculinity, and that you kind of have.
But that would also be toxic femininity.
Well, may I like finish my sentence,
Sure.
please? Thank you. And then also, I lost my sentence now. But no, I will be back. I'm back. But more in the sense that. Yeah, can someone help me here in the audience?
Okay, so before we move on, let me point something out. That I was willing to undertake this line of discussion, allowing for the possibility that the category of toxic masculinity had some content, right? But if we're going to pursue that line of reasoning and quibble about the answer, then we're certainly going to quibble about the definition that's embedded in the question. And so part of what's happened in our discourse is that we're required ethically to assume a priori, merely out of politeness, that the utterance toxic masculinity actually constitutes a meaningful phrase. And if you push it, you find very rapidly that it doesn't, because it's very, very, very difficult to define, and definitions actually matter. And so if it's a matter of transgressing against the boundaries of gender-appropriate behavior, well, first of all, that indicates that there's something universal and normative about gender-appropriate behavior, which is something that people who push the idea of toxic masculinity generally tend not to presume. And second, it's just as likely to happen among women as among men, in which case it's not toxic masculinity. So maybe on to the next question.
Okay. Okay, so you have freedom of speech, and you often express that you're very much against political correctness. So how I would define that is putting societal boundaries on free speech. Would you can I continue? Is that a good definition of political correctness in your opinion?
No.
Okay, how would you define it?
Well, political correctness is something that I see as having been primarily formulated in the early 1970s. I think it's a unholy marriage, so to speak, between Marxism and postmodernism. And I've been criticized for that view because people say, well, it can't be a marriage between postmodernism and Marxism because postmodernism is predicated on skepticism towards meta-narratives and Marxism is a meta-narrative, so obviously there can't be any postmodern Marxists. And my reply to that is, well, yes, clearly that's the case from the perspective of pure coherence, but that doesn't seem to matter because there are plenty of postmodern Marxists. And that's not my problem because I can't distinguish between them conceptually, it's just the manner in which things have laid themselves out. It was a movement that was primarily a consequence of activity among French intellectuals in the early 70s, and to me it was in part a consequence of two things. It was a consequence of the demise of the intellectual and moral credibility of Marxism, especially in the aftermath of the revelations of the Stalinist and Maoist atrocities that characterized much of the 20th century. So that was one of the what would you call motivating factors, because all the people who held those Marxist viewpoints had to find another avenue of expression for their ideological commitments. And but then the second one, and this is a deeper one, is that there has been a very troublesome epistemological problem that's emerged in multiple fields since the early 1960s in artificial intelligence and in psychology and in literary criticism. And the problem is attendant on the discovery that there's a virtually infinite number of ways of categorizing a finite number of objects. And so what that means is this is integrally tied in, for example, with the difficulty that AI pioneers had in producing machines that could perceive the world, because we thought that the world was made out of sort of discriminable objects in their self-evident categories, and that was just there for the perceiving, and that turned out to be seriously wrong. And so the postmodernist types ran across this problem. They thought, well, how many interpretations are there of a Shakespeare play? And the answer is innumerable interpretations. And then the next problem is, well, then how do you rank order those innumerable interpretations in terms of quality? And that's a major problem. And so political correctness is, well, those are its sources, but it turns out, practically speaking, that it's an amalgam of a rather nihilistic strain of postmodernism with a rather desperate strain of Marxism. So,
if you say that masculinity in itself is toxic, then you're also saying that all the people who are masculine, who stand up, all the categories of masculinity, like being courageous is masculine feature, standing up for what's right is masculinity, standing up for what's wrong, standing up for justice, standing up for your family, protecting them, providing them, manufacturing, making things, okay, building things, constructing things, masculine features. These are masculine features, okay? And now someone comes up and says, I think masculinity in itself is toxic. Then you're also saying that all those things are bad, and nobody ever, I don't think, would agree that those things are bad, because those things are not bad. Those things are fucking good. And that's what happens when he asks him, okay, what do you mean by toxic masculinity? She cannot answer it, okay? What she should say, okay, there are some people who are bad, who are male. That's what could be the answer. But you cannot say that masculinity in itself is bad. So the term toxic masculinity is non-existent term. Like, it doesn't exist. People just call it as a nickname, I would say. Okay, it doesn't exist. Some crazy feminist, that's what I would say, call them. Some crazy feminists call it toxic masculinity, but it's not true and it's not a real word. And I think that's what people believe, most of the people, my fans, my followers. I don't have really too much, but I've seen people, I've talked to a lot of people, and they don't really believe in this toxic masculinity. But I do believe that there are some people who are masculine, male, and they could do some wrong things, and they deserve the punishment for that. But that doesn't mean that masculinity becomes wrong in that scenario. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the channel. Come on, let others know. Okay, he's making good videos. Let's watch his videos. Come on. Thank you for watching, and thank you for giving me your precious time. I'll take my leave here. Till then, goodbye.